Indeed. Thanks, Brendan. So one of the reasons why we're putting the festival on, in addition to celebrate Nexus, is of course to celebrate networks and collaboration of various formats around the world because of the systems change and other forms of social change and impact that networks are having that are unique. By the way, the network values operate and its format, and there aren't a lot of spaces where that would be celebrated and recognized and where we could learn from one another. So the festival is a space for us to do that. So you will see amongst yourselves people who are network coordinators, who are network funders, people who are building community in different ways. And hopefully you would have attended some of our events already because we started at the beginning of May and we have still 2 weeks packed of different online events that you can participate in. We have speakers from around the world, and so there's a huge diversity. Hopefully you will find something for yourself in this in the festival, including the different types of activities. Today you will be witnessing a pitch practice, but there is also storytelling sessions, there are workshops, there are dialogues, so we are covering a huge diversity of topics as well, whether it is, for example, gender equity that will be coming in 2 weeks' time, but also we have already talked about, for example, environmental activism just 2 weeks ago as well. If you have signed up for any of the events but you were not able to attend, you will still be able to get the recording, so hopefully you will be able to benefit that way. So that was a little bit of a background about the festival and why are we here. And so just allow me then to introduce our speakers and participants or panelists for the session today. We will be, for this format, splitting into 2 breakout groups in just a few minutes. One of them will be led by Katie, who will be presenting Now Teach, and the second one by Kavita, who will be presenting Global Schools Forum. And our funders or representatives of different foundations that you see on your screen will be joining each of the 2 groups to provide their feedback. So in order to help you decide which of the 2 groups you want to join, I would now invite Katie for maybe 30 seconds to give a quick top message of the topics that you will be covering in your pitch.
So my name's Katie, and I set up a charity called Now Teach here in England, which is all about recruiting career changers, so experienced career changers, average age is about 50, into teaching. And our hope is to build these people into a really strong network who can best support the students and communities and schools that they serve. So that's what we'll be talking about.
Thanks so much, Katie. And Kavita, the same to you. Please, for 30 seconds, a brief intro.
Hi everyone, I'm Kavita and I'm representing the Global Schools Forum. So in my pitch, I will be talking about the work that we do. We are a network of non-state organizations providing education to some of the most underserved children. And I will talk about the work that GSF does with our community of partners. You're still muted, Jan.
Thank you. You would think that by now this doesn't happen, but it does. But anyways, so we will now be splitting into the 2 groups. In each of the group, there will be the opportunity for Katie and Kavita to tell their pitch for a few minutes. They will get into a conversation with our funders, and there will be plenty of opportunity for you as participants today to also share your thoughts in the chat. So please do take advantage of that and also share your thoughts. Then after about half an hour in these groups, we will come back together to share those experiences and kind of collectively reflect on the discussions that we had. So without further ado, Brendan, may I ask you to open?
Yeah, they're open. So sometimes this works for some people, but not everybody. So you should see in the bottom of your Zoom screen a button for breakout rooms, and you can choose between Katie's or Kavita's, whatever interests you more. And then if you can't choose, you're not sure, I can also just put you in. So we'll do. I can pause.
Hopefully. Brilliant. Hopefully we didn't lose too many people all along the virtual transfer from one room to the next. And so we have now some time to collectively reflect on what we have heard and kind of continue the discussion on the practices. And so, Brandon, you will have to forgive me that we didn't fully follow your format in our discussion, but there was a lot of great exchanges and a lot of learnings. And maybe if I could start actually this discussion with asking Kavita and Katie to reflect on what they have heard and on the feedback that they have received from the funders. Was that something that it kind of resonated with you in particular? So we can start with that, and then of course our funders, please do chip into the debate as well as what are you taking away maybe from the conversation. So I don't know if Kavita or Katie, one of you would like to go first, maybe offer your reflections.
I'll do it.
Katie, please.
The key top tip apparently is that you must use the word emergent in all application forms. This was my top tips. Now I've got that in capital letters. But more seriously, I think that there was incredibly helpful and engaged thought from everybody, which I'm incredibly grateful. Those of you who are in my room. I think people pointing out quite rightly that even where you can't necessarily talk about sort of previous impact and so on, to talk in reasonably tangible terms about timescales and how it can be shifting to something that's hopefully sustainable, or what your plan at least for the sustainability is, so that you're not endlessly dependent on one donor. I talked in quite sort of highfalutin terms, I suspect, rather than kind of this is the plan for the next 6 years and this is what we'd be asking for. There was the obvious point that of course we must tailor to the particular funder, that was difficult in this instance. I love the comment about and also something about the monitoring and evaluation. I think that's written down, monitoring evaluation, but articulating that better. I love the point about reminding one of the power of stories, but where somebody took that to a much more analytical level almost, and said that you can use the story to show rather than tell the infrastructure that you provide. So I'm interpreting that to mean that, if I say they met at this particular event, then they did something in this magazine, they did such and such on our platform, they did, I am showing all the things that we have put in place without having to go on about it. So I found that helpful. To articulate the hypothesis, and crucially to have make really clear your test and learn. If you're asking someone to fund something rather than much on faith, then making it very clear how you anticipate that this is a test and learn model. So you're not saying we've got this idea, we're going to do this and we're going to do it 20 times because we're sure it's right, but to look at what you're going to learn from it and how you'll move forward.
Thanks, Katie. And Kavita, did any of that resonate with you? Did you receive any similar feedback around feedback mechanisms, for example, or any other elements that Katie mentioned?
Yeah, so I think a lot of similar comments. I think the piece around the stories, because we're a network, just showcasing the community and the impact that we've had on them a little clearer. Also thinking about our impact, showcasing our new strategy going forward, and really the specific ask for funders. But other than, all of the wonderful things that Katie said, for me, the big kind of takeaway as I'm reflecting now is just choosing the right information to share. 4 minutes is really short. So you're trying to, I was trying to get in as much information as I can to talk about GSF as a whole, but it's really about thinking about what is the most powerful information or the most powerful story. And I think that's really my big takeaway from this.
Thanks, Kavita. And I think that was part of what we discussed in our group as well, that, for example, donors being interested to know what is the catalytic part of their investment in you in particular. And I don't know if maybe the funders in the room would be willing to maybe speak about how do you think you as a funder are thinking about the catalytic investment differently, maybe from what you know about maybe quote unquote traditional funders or other funders, when you think about networks and what it means, especially investing in networks. Are there any thoughts on that from your experiences? And don't be shy, please just unmute yourself and do speak.
Okay, maybe just to start, it's foundation, they have the flexibility in a way to support new things. And in comparison to World Bank, whether they want to be pretty sure, then it's why many times we ask about, our funding can really help you make a difference that you can't make otherwise. Then, you really have to see, depending the funder, what they can risk or not. And with foundation, on our case, it's one of the feedback we got. They really like the fact that they can test things and learn, and it's okay to fail, but we have to discuss it on front. That way you want support for creativity.
Any other funders who are willing to put their hand up and saying that we're also ready to accept failure if the project doesn't go according to plan?
I can jump in on that one. I think it goes back to a comment I made in the breakout about having a clear hypothesis to test. And that I think we're more comfortable with that risk if there's a hypothesis and then that clear mechanism for testing and learning as the work progresses. And I also think that in conversations with larger foundations, and I work at the Rockefeller Foundation, that it's also important to have a sense of what team within the organization or kind of who you might be pitching to. That, at least from my observation, some of our teams that are focused on specific programmatic areas would have more risk tolerance than other types of funders, but maybe less risk tolerance than our innovation team that's focused on really new frontiers of how we might deliver impact. And so that's also something to think about. I imagine it's with medium to larger foundations, but that there might be different avenues and different teams that are looking at the risk profile differently.
Yeah, and just to add as well, I think, there's a lot of talk in the funding sector about this thing of risk and actually what is risk to a philanthropic foundation? It's not public money, it's not, the risk is held entirely, if a project fails, for want of a better word, then actually there aren't huge repercussions to that. And I think foundations need to move move into a place where they can be more comfortable with that. But I also think that there's a lot of talk in the sector and less kind of action. And whilst a lot of organizations and funders will say, oh, we're happy to take risks, we're happy to give core funding, it doesn't actually translate that well in reality. And that's something to be aware of when you're coming to funders. I think that a lot of the intention is there, but the reality is not quite there yet. But I think we're in the middle of a kind of a shift. But yeah, I think it's a really important kind of subject, really. But yeah, something to be aware of, even when it kind of looks like a trust-based kind of catalytic grant, it might not actually always. And I think agreeing that at the beginning and saying if this fails, what does that mean? And what does failure mean? And having kind of open conversations about that.
Thanks, Chrissy. And I wonder whether some of the others also would be able to chip in, for example, about the willingness to have those conversations up front, also to, even before you actually go to the formal pitching exercise, just to do a little bit of that scoping before, to understand who are the right people to speak to, who to pitch to, or, what is the level of risk appetite in reality behind what's written maybe on the website. I don't know if you have those kind of practices and are willing to engage in this kind of conversation. Sharina, I see you're on mute.
Yeah, yes. I mean, I think definitely so, right? And I think especially, so I work at the Innovation Foundation, where sort of the model of how we work with other partners is a bit different as well. So we're not a grant giving foundation, but we do want to partner with folks. So we're really looking at how do we partner together and co-create together and actually work through this together. So in order to do that, we very much have to have this kind of conversation very frankly upfront as well, as to what are we both expecting out of this and what are we going to work towards and how we're going to do that as well before we even think about going down that road. So we start those conversations very, very early. And I think it's, for us at least, we're very open to that. It's one of those things that's kind of a precursor that does need to happen. And I think that's going to become increasingly more so in this kind of a space as well. Just because the models as well need to change a little bit than the usual grant giving foundation models that we've had in the past, into really more partnership work that you do together and more collaboration work amongst not just the the civil society folks and foundations, but also just the corporations, foundation to foundation as well. That needs to be sort of a more collaborative space, and I think we're working towards that as well. And we're happy to work with anybody to lead into that.
Thanks, Sharina. Anyone else shares that strategy? Is that something that you're adopting yourselves? And of course, Kavita and Katie, if you also have other questions, please do feel free to ask. But I don't know, maybe if Katya, how is it for you for BMW Foundation practices?
I think Marina was unmuted. Please, Marina.
Oh no, it was a mistake, but I can I can share like a reflection I have, because there is a shift also in how network can play a role in the transformation that are ongoing as they become more and more complexity, as we embrace complexity, and networks are very good at very good strategy to influence systems, or as we had in our breakout room, Katie having as vision. I think it's also important to maybe use, if there is enough knowledge in the founder of the network about the system that you're trying to influence, and understand what are the leverage points that we are going after, that is supposed to be your indicator for impact in a way. And if that knowledge is not there, how can you build that knowledge? How can you use your network, your decentralized network, to do that mapping and understand your, maybe in regions or in however the boundaries of the system needs to be designed for it to make sense in your context. But I think that will be something very valuable and useful moving forward. Especially when you collaborate with the others as a way to deliver that impact as a network. I just wanted to reflect on this.
Thanks, Marina. I think a lot of us who are in the network space do not always remember to outright say what are the benefits of working in a networks way, and I think you kind of articulated it very clearly. So thank you so much for doing that. I think one of the things that I was also reflecting on was that, of course, we have a room of people who clearly get networks and clearly get the language. I think even the reflection that Katie shared, that the emergence was a word that was actually quite prominent in our conversations. I wonder whether that is actually quite unique, and if there's any tips and tricks the funders could share also for us. How do we recognize a funder who is ready to have those conversations, or who gets it? Is there are there telltale signs that will show us that these are the funders who actually understand the language and are prepared to have those conversations around networks?
I have to say, I'm completely new to all this. I only ever worked with direct service delivery charities, so this is all great education. It's all very new for me. I wish I was experienced at this, but this is part of getting there, I suppose. So I just want to say how much I appreciate everybody's help, but I'm not an experienced person with this at all.
Can I ask, Deirdre, since you're in listening to the presentations, or at least the one, Kavita's, that you heard, was it clear to you coming from that perspective? Because I think most people that we do these presentations to come from a not network perspective, as Jan was saying.
Right. I think that the last thing you just talked about how it wasn't clear what advantage networks brought to the table on this particular issue, I think would have been helpful to hear. Otherwise, I'm just a sponge absorbing stuff right now. So. What's that? Okay.
Thanks, Deirdre. Well, I think we are closely or almost out of time together. So I think as we wrap up, it would be lovely also for other audience members if you would be willing to share in the chat as you're kind of logging out. What are some of the things you're taking away from these conversations? Maybe something ideally you can implement in your work in the foreseeable future. And at the same time, also to extend an invitation to further collaboration with the speakers, with InHive, with Nexus, at the back of this festival, because we are really hoping to continue having conversations so that we can jointly start shifting some of those practices, either through amongst the funding practices for networks, but also about the best practices. So if you would be interested to continue having those conversations and explore collaborations, please do get in touch. And as you log off, let me also just thank all the speakers and the panelists, Kavita and Katie, for the bravery to step in front of the funders and to pitch and to practice and to hear back the feedback, and for the funders for being so generous with your comments and advice. So thank you very much, everyone, and hope to see you at another Enact event in the future.
And if I might just say, in particular, I think this was the first time we've done this session, and so this is I think an experiment for us.